From 1969 to 1974, the Brady Bunch invited America into television's most famous blended family and gave them an idealized vision of domestic life that still echoes through popular culture. A story about a lovely lady, a man named Brady, and their picture-perfect suburban household became much more than just a sitcom. It grew into a cultural touchstone that defined the way multiple generations thought about family life. But behind the sunny suburban world of the Brady family lay complexes, tensions, and sometimes uncomfortable truths that never made it onto the screen. In recent years, Barry Williams, Maureen McCormick, Christopher Knight, and other cast members have unearthed long-buried stories the public never saw. They enumerated bitter disputes with network executives that pushed the show towards cancellation more than once. They recalled the notorious original concept ABC had rejected as too progressive for mainstream audiences. They even exposed some jaw-dropping physical dangers on a set that seemed to be completely safe. And perhaps most shocking of all, they revealed that the show's creator led a private life that paled in comparison to the traditional values his show promoted so publicly. The Brady Bunch was not just a family sitcom. It was an incredibly contrived fantasy that often came at a cost to the young performers tasked with propping up its wholesome image. Sherwood Schwartz once admitted that he'd been selling America a family that couldn't exist in reality. More often than not, the actors' real lives and struggles differed from what viewers saw every week. The most surprising truth about the show begins with a concept ABC was once afraid of. While the Brady Bunch seemed to be television's most traditional family show, it was originally conceived as a groundbreaking exploration of America's shifting family structures. In 1969, blended families were rarely represented on television, and divorce itself was still taboo. A widower and a widow marrying each other and raising previous children seemed far more progressive than it looked. Schwartz's original idea was even gutsier. He wanted the parents to be divorced, not widowed. ABC refused, citing that divorce would be too controversial for family viewing hours. The network required both parents to be widowed to avoid offending conservative audiences, leading to an internal contradiction that shaped the entire series. Florence Henderson later explained that even the word divorce was taboo. Carol Brady's first marriage was never explained, and thus created one of the greatest mysteries in television history. Robert Reed remembered that writers were stopped even from trying to explain her backstory. She was neither confirmed widowed nor divorced. The network simply wanted silence. Such a balancing act reached even into the representation of gender roles on the show. Carol Brady was a stay-at-home mom, but educated, occasionally mentioned career aspirations, and she shared the decision-making process with her husband. Mike Brady was written and acted as a listening, empathizing father who expressed vulnerability. Their characters mirrored a subtle but significant shift toward more progressive depictions of masculinity and femininity. Even the formation of the household broke some norms in small but meaningful ways. The housekeeper, Alice, was a real member of the family, with her own storylines and weight in the household. The network was deeply cautious, however. Set design was done in a traditional and comforting manner. The famous Brady house projected a sense of stability and idealistic upper-middle-class values. Every visual choice was done to give softness to the progressive premise of the show. That same tension informed the casting. ABC did want parents with clean and wholesome public images, hence the choice of Florence Henderson and Robert Reed. The kids were cast not only for talent, but for visual cohesion as well. And, as Schwartz has mentioned, similar coloring and features were favored because he wanted the audience to look at the kids and feel it was one family, rather than two different families. The opening title made that perspective both explicit and graphic, turning 6 unrelated children into one happy combined unit. Storylines also sidestepped the legitimate complications of blended family life. Writers were directed to avoid friction arising from step-sibling conflict and growing pains. Instead, the writers played to common childhood experiences and told a family life version that was safe, uncomplicated, and free of conflict. Even the concept of a blended family was seldom, if ever, mentioned after the pilot. The terms stepmother and stepfather were rarely, if ever, used. This was another deliberate avoidance that allowed the normalization of family structure and yet distanced the show from the realities many blended families faced. Behind the scenes, however, harmony was often hard to find. The 6 child actors, ranging in age from 8 to 14 when the show began, experienced natural tensions that occasionally grew into real conflict. As Barry Williams later explained, they all had different personalities and backgrounds, and differed in their levels of experience. The assumption that they would be as close as a set of real siblings was just another part of the fantasy. Christopher Knight recalls the pressures of constant togetherness. They spent long days filming, rehearsing, completing schoolwork on set, doing publicity events, recording music, and even performing on concert tours. That level of closeness would strain any group of children, especially those working under the demands of network television. The girls' rivalries were among the most intense behind-the-scenes dynamics. Maureen McCormick remembered that she, and Jan specifically, the actress Eve Plum often had some very complicated interactions. The on-screen rivalry would occasionally bleed into real life, bringing an emotional charge that viewers never saw. These conflicts were part of the hidden world, outside the screen, behind a series built on an almost perfect illusion of sibling harmony. We were similar in age, fighting for many of the same storylines, and living through adolescence in the unnatural environment of a television set. The Marcia dynamic was at least somewhat rooted in reality. On occasion, it even bled into production. Director Oscar Rudolph says some combinations of kids just couldn't function well on certain days. Scenes would sometimes be rewritten or rearranged to keep certain children away from each other if tensions were running too high. Scripts that depicted perfect sibling harmony were sometimes being filmed by kids that wouldn't speak to each other between takes. A different array of issues faced the boys. Being the oldest, Barry Williams sometimes felt that he couldn't relate as well to the other boys. Mike Kinland remembers that Barry was just entering adolescence when the show started and had interests and concerns different from theirs. This created a natural distance at times which could have come across as condescending. The Big Brother Knows Best dynamic wasn't an act in its entirety. Age gaps set natural pairings. Susan Olsen cited her closer bonding with Eve Plum, even though her on-screen character clashed often with her. Maureen McCormick and Barry shared more things in common, since they were both the oldest within their respective groups. These sets of natural groupings sometimes contradicted the family setup displayed on screen, causing some strange disconnections between portrayed and actual relationships. The artificial family configuration added to the complex mix. Playing siblings, the cast also developed normal childhood crushes on each other. Barry's much-publicized infatuation with Florence Henderson is an obvious example, but perfectly ordinary teenaged feelings developed among the teenage cast as well. This created awkwardness when actors were called upon to display close sibling affection while working through confusing real emotions. Competition for screen time heightened these tensions. As the series unfolded, some characters took center stage. The writers consistently gave more attention and better storylines to Maureen and Barry. According to Christopher Knight, it was easy to see why this would breed resentment in other cast members. When Jan shouted the famous lines Marcia, 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 the frustration evident in Eve Plum's performance was an emotion she said she felt quite often on set. The network and the producers worked hard to keep these issues hidden. Publicist Michael Levine noted that any hint of discord among the children threatened the show's image of perfect unity. They were instructed to present themselves as loving siblings in interviews and appearances no matter what was happening behind the scenes. Many times, adult cast members served as mediators. Ann B. Davis, playing the role of Alice, would often help soothe tensions with humor and patience. Florence Henderson modeled professionalism and urged mutual respect among the children. Robert Reed's situation added another layer of complexity. His frequent creative conflicts with the producers sometimes spilled into his interactions with the children. Barry Williams explained that Reed would occasionally withdraw emotionally when frustrated by scripts or direction. As kids, they didn't fully understand the professional disputes and sometimes mistook his distance for personal rejection. These tensions ironically enhanced the performances on the show. Those episodes that dealt with sibling rivalry, especially those between Jan and Marcia, rang so true because they were rooted in real emotional dynamics. Television critic Robert Thompson argued that Eve Plum's performance of Jan's resentment genuinely had emotional heft because she was tapping into her own frustrations. The relationships among the cast changed over the years. By the latter seasons, early tensions had dissipated, and new issues emerged as the children matured and developed more individualized identities. Knight remembered that with age, some relationships got better, while others grew more complicated. These complex relationships also continued through reunions and revival projects. Even producer Sherwood Schwartz acknowledged that some cast combinations were always problematic to bring together. Publicly framed as scheduling conflicts, these often represented lingering reservations toward working with certain former castmates. Not all revival projects featured the complete original cast, in part because old tensions had never fully dissipated. Despite all that, these problems didn't wipe out the real relationships the cast shared. Maureen McCormick reiterated that the kids shared something special together and made contacts that are difficult but very much true. They weren't the perfect siblings to TV audiences, nor were they merely colleagues either. Their relationships fell into a weird middle ground, real and artificial, brought about by the strange, unusual conditions of their growing up. This complexity explains why cast members' accounts of their relationships sometimes seem to contradict each other. Barry Williams said that relationships constantly changed. They might be at war one day and all in harmony the next. The simple narratives that they were either all best friends or all secretly bitter missed the reality of children growing up together in an unusual, pressurized environment. But behind the scenes, America's ideal father figure was another story altogether. Robert Reed led a life that was in conflict with conservative values propagated by the show, and, therefore, led to heavy personal and professional struggles. According to friend and colleague E.G. Marshall, Reed's greatest performance wasn't Mike Brady, but the performance of a man faking comfort in being the face of traditional family values, while he himself lived a life as a gay man. In 1969, during the start of the series, this would have been career suicide. Therefore, Reed's success placed him under an inordinate amount of burden. He was forced into denying himself. This created a potentially explosive contradiction. Reed was already a classically trained Shakespearean actor who bridled at the limitations of the sitcom format. Having to play a character whose values ran contrary to some of the essential aspects of his own life only added to his frustration. According to director John Rich, Reed was yearning for some realism and substance. Most of his fights with the producers were not ego-driven, but stemmed from discomfort over scripts featuring subtle homophobia or simplistic family portrayals. One example that has become infamous occurred during the 5th season episode The Driver's Seat. It included a joke Reed found offensive. Unable to divulge his real reason for objecting, he refused to appear in the final scene and framed his concerns as artistic integrity. His objections sometimes made him seem difficult when, in reality, he was trying to protect himself and others like him. Reed's loneliness on the set was deep. According to Florence Henderson, he was unable to share his situation with coworkers, and while some of the adult professionals might have suspected his orientation, it was never addressed. He was mostly alone in carrying this weight while portraying the perfect father, but not being able to pursue happiness openly. This isolation extended into his relationships with the child actors. Barry Williams remembered Reed as always professional and appropriate, yet often emotionally reserved. With hindsight, Barry suspected that Reed was protecting himself by maintaining distance. Despite this, Reed still formed meaningful connections. Christopher Knight recalled Reed looking out for the kids' interests, especially in regard to education and exploitation in commercial matters. Most of his conflicts with producers were fought on their behalf. The most painful irony was the fact that the Brady Bunch celebrated acceptance and unity, yet its star could not safely reveal his own truth. Cultural critic Mary McNamara noticed how the series embraced this concept of blending different parts together into a unified family. But the world that so adored Mike Brady would not have accepted Robert Reed. As the series wore on, the strain of keeping his public persona going began to take its toll. Henderson said Reed withdrew further into himself as time went by. The success that was supposed to have been a career highlight was emotionally wearing him out. Producer Sherwood Schwartz later acknowledged that he didn't really understand how much some of Reed's objections struck deep in his own psyche. What Schwartz had mistaken for artistic obstinacy often reflected Reed's silent struggle with scripts touching painful areas of his life. Yet Reed remained a consummate professional. According to Lloyd Schwartz, Reed gave mostly solid, dedicated performances in spite of his considerable personal turmoil at times. Even his returning for Brady reunions, such as The Brady Girls Get Married and A Very Brady Christmas, showed the regard in which he held the series and its relation to the audience. Reed's death from HIV-related causes in 1992 finally made public the truth he had been forced to hide throughout the show's run. His story stands as one of the most poignant and revealing chapters in the history of the Brady Bunch. The revelation of Robert's sexual orientation and the true cause of his death created a deep sense of cognitive dissonance for many fans, said media scholar Robert Thompson. America's ideal father figure had been a gay man at a time when that identity was still heavily stigmatized. Learning this forced viewers to reconsider not only the character, but the painful social restrictions that had shaped Reed's private life. This reassessment has only deepened appreciation for his work. Knowing what we now know adds layers to his performance, suggests GLAAD representative Matt Cain. Reed created a nurturing, emotionally open father figure, one that challenged stereotypes about masculinity. Some believe his portrayal was influenced by his experience navigating restrictive expectations about gender and identity. Florence Henderson perhaps gave the most touching reflection on Reed's legacy. She said he gave millions of children an image of a father who was patient, understanding, and emotionally present. After his death, she reflected that this gift came from someone who had to hide his true identity, making his contribution both more tragic and more remarkable. His vision of familial acceptance was something that he himself was never able to fully experience. It was a profound achievement born at great personal cost. While the Brady Bunch seemed like it would be the safest and most innocuous television environment imaginable, the set exposed its young performers to some surprising dangers, demanding conditions, and situations that clearly would violate modern child safety standards. The Brady house that viewers saw every week was not a real home, but a partial and frequently hazardous set combined with an actual house that was never designed for television production, says set designer Royer. Most scenes were shot on sound stages, which created ongoing safety issues thanks to cramped spaces, lighting rigs, and the need to match shots between locations. The Brady living room and staircase were particularly hazardous. Susan Olsen remembered that the staircase was built much steeper than most to enhance camera angles. The kids ran up and down the steps, endlessly in heels or platform shoes and with bell-bottoms that read like fluttering wings, encouraging a trip hazard. The limited visibility due to costume and props made for a very hazardous situation. There were many falls and near misses, even if not on screen. These hazards extended to the show's physical comedy. Christopher Knight explained that many stunts performed on the series would require professional safety coordinators today. Whether it was Peter breaking Carol's vase with a basketball, Greg falling through an attic floor, or chaotic food fights, the young actors often performed their own stunts without necessary preparation or protection. Even the backyard, artificial turf and all, concealed hazards. Mike Lookinland remembered that the AstroTurf was laid over concrete. When kids fell on it, it was like hitting green sandpaper laid over cement. Scrapes, burns, and bruises. Scenes that looked innocent enough to viewers felt very different to the children performing them. The demands on this young cast often pushed reasonable limits. Williams remembers grueling schedules, especially during seasons when they also recorded albums and performed concerts. A typical day might involve filming for hours, recording music in the evening, and memorizing scripts late into the night. Balancing academic requirements with these production demands created chronic sleep deprivation for many of them. Certain episodes put the children into situations that are strictly forbidden today. McCormick remembered one particular shot when, in Hawaii, a live tarantula was placed on her body to crawl across. Scared to death, she was supposed to lie there and not move for the shot. And then there was the Grand Canyon episode where shooting was also done near the rim with hardly any safety precautions. Knight recalled how kids were standing near steep drops, but nobody paid much attention, busy with getting the shot rather than the complete protection of the kids. Even routine production conditions proved damaging. According to director John Rich, the lighting for cameras in the 1970s produced incredible heat. Sound stages regularly reached over 90 degrees, while the children wore heavy polyester costumes for long periods. Heat exhaustion and dehydration were common, but rarely treated as serious concerns. The pressure continued to creep into more personal aspects of the kids' lives. As they entered puberty, being under the constant gaze of an audience informed their mental and emotional states. McCormick says that the need to portray a perfect Brady image led her to develop eating disorders. Others struggled with body image as normal adolescent changes, voice cracks, growth spurts. Acne were treated as production problems rather than natural developments. Education often fell by the wayside. Olson wrote that the show technically fulfilled the 3 hours of schooling daily required by California law, but the classes were frequently interrupted and held in whatever space was available. The need for production trumped academic development, and some cast members struggled long afterward as a result. Most disturbing, however, was the lack of any psychological support. According to Knight, nobody stopped to think about what fame in childhood would be like when they grew up. No counselors, no advice for parents, nothing to shield the children from celebrity pressures the show's production needs were all that mattered. Financial matters brought another layer of complication. According to Look Inland, most of them made much less than people thought. Contracts were signed before the show was successful and almost never renegotiated. Many only later found out that their earnings had been drained or eroded through fees, mismanagement, or simply a lack of oversight. Commercial exploitation made these problems worse. Their likenesses were everywhere: lunchboxes, board games, clothing, and countless other products, but they received little compensation. As Plum explained, even though their images powered huge merchandising campaigns, the children received only their standard episodic pay. Historically, these conditions reflected industry norms rather than malice. Entertainment attorney Melanie Cook says many of today's child protection regulations did not exist at the time. Today's protections around working hours, safety, education, finances, and psychological support simply weren't in place during the Brady Bunch era. Still, the absence of ill intent doesn't diminish the impact. Williams said that understanding the historical context doesn't negate the risks they faced. The Brady Bunch projected an image of warmth, harmony, and family unity, yet behind the scenes operated under conditions often placing its young cast in harm's way. Beyond the on-air program, the Brady Bunch was one of the earliest and most aggressive child-focused merchandising machines to hit television. As licensing historian Jeffrey Allen describes, it pioneered mass marketing of child actors' images across dozens of product categories. What started with simple licensed products, such as lunchboxes and board games, expanded into clothing lines, bedroom furniture, and school supplies, among many other products, all with the faces of the Brady children on them. The financial arrangements highlighted the exploitive nature of the system. Barry Williams relates that their contracts gave the studio broad merchandise rights, and very little or no money came to the children from products that often generated millions in revenue. This exploitation became even more pronounced once the recording ventures related to the show began, as the children were increasingly used in albums, performances, and promotional events with similarly limited financial benefit. The Brady Kids albums and singles represented a new area of commercial exploitation for the young cast. Christopher Knight remembers that none of them had been selected based on their musical talent. Yet they now found themselves recording albums and even going on tour as musical performers. These had never been included in their original contracts, but their voices and images brought in a lot of additional money for the studio. According to Maureen McCormick, most of the cast were not very good singers, and producers often used session vocalists to double or even replace them. Nevertheless, the records were promoted as authentic Brady performances, which serves to illustrate how commercial considerations trumped any concerns about artistic integrity or appropriateness of these additional demands on child actors. The recording schedule put further pressure on the cast schedules, which were already packed. Susan Olson remembers how taping might take place all day with recording music at night, leaving hardly any time for schoolwork, let alone rest or the normal experiences a child should have. Commercial appearances and products took precedence over the well-being of the kids. Eve Plum goes on to relate that they were then sent on grueling promotional tours to shopping centers, fairs, and department stores. Many such events did not have effective security, meaning that kids were swamped by aggressive crowds while still expected to maintain perfect Brady behavior. Financial pressures only added to these tensions. As Mike Lukinland recalls, child performer protections were still in the process of being developed, and manager fees, parental use, taxes, and loose contract terms all ate into their earnings. Many of the Brady cast members would learn in adulthood that their earnings from the show had been drastically reduced or lost. Writer Joseph Bonaduce describes how even the creative decisions of the show were informed by commercial imperatives. As the studio pushed for ever higher profits, episodes incorporated more and more opportunities for merchandise tie-ins, musical numbers, or other marketable scenarios. How far the producers would go was evident with the creation of the animated series called The Brady Kids. Barry Williams remembered that the cartoon allowed for a broader range of merchandise categories and employed only the actors' voices. Their contracts gave producers wide latitude for the creation of derivative projects and limited obligation toward fairly compensating the performers. These practices left long-lasting effects on the actors, many of whom suffered financial setbacks as adults despite starring in one of television's most profitable franchises. Christopher Knight describes a disconnect between the massive commercial footprint of the Brady Bunch and the modest financial reality of the performers themselves. According to entertainment attorney John Branca, the Brady merchandising system reflected wider industry norms. The economics of children's entertainment were designed to maximize studio profits while stifling compensation for young performers. Only later reforms and union negotiations began to right these imbalances. Barry Williams, for one, considers it the great cosmic irony that the wholesome family values represented in front of the cameras were, in reality, offset by aggressive commercial exploitation around every corner. The Brady Bunch created this picture of parental protection, while the business model treated the children primarily as revenue-generating assets. This contradiction became particularly apparent with the 1976 to 1977 Brady Bunch Hour, which was created and performed after Eve Plum refused to take part. Knight recalls it as the pinnacle of exploitation, where kids were performing sophisticated musical and comedic numbers irrespective of their capability or comfort. The vested commercial interest in the program suppressed any consideration for the actors' growth and natural artistic suitability. According to Maureen McCormick, most of the actors started to have mixed emotions concerning their Brady roles. Their characters symbolized the fond memories and the system that had co-opted their childhoods. Children's entertainment historian Barbara Sprung observes that the Brady merchandising model set the template for 2 decades. From the Brady Bunch to Hannah Montana, the formula was the same: create charismatic child characters, license their images relentlessly, add music irrespective of whether the child actors had musical talent, and write contracts so performers received limited compensation for derivative works. Media ethicist Michael Shapiro believes this generated a disturbing disconnect between the show's message and the actuality of how it was produced. The on-air celebration of family harmony sharply contrasted with the corporate mechanisms for siphoning value from the children playing those family members. Sociologist Todd Gitlin writes that the Brady Bunch became an icon, not just a television program. Its name became shorthand for blended families, wholesome values, and 1970s cultural style. Its visual design from the opening grid to the famous house became instantly recognizable. As design historian Alexandra Lang explains, it was just these visual markers that helped to embed the show deep into American cultural memory. This visual iconography also produced a peculiar tension. As celebrity historian Leo Brody notes, while the cast aged, their Brady personas remained forever young through perpetual reruns. Reunion shows drove this point home, reinforcing the fascinating blend of nostalgia and reality that shaped the franchise's appeal. Family therapist William Doherty says that the acceptance, cooperation, and unity inherent in the show prevail beyond generational shifts in values. This explains the power of the show's themes to continue touching the audience, navigating modern-day family complexities. The 2018 series, A Very Brady Renovation, became an instant hit for HGTV. Nearly 50 years later, the Brady legacy remains strong enough to draw massive audiences. The show even influenced real families. According to scholar Francesca Adlerbader, therapists who worked with blended families during the 1970s and 1980s commonly reported clients citing the Bradys as a model. Simplistic though the show's portrayal of blended family life was, it offered hope along with a structure to families experiencing similar dynamics. It's a legacy that to the cast is at once a blessing and a burden. According to Barry Williams, the Brady connection created professional opportunities while also limiting how people perceive them as individuals. The roles defined them to the public mind, sometimes overshadowing their broader identities and careers.